Okay, welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 83. Make yourself great again this week in macro. I went through some of the trends this week in Bitcoin from Bitcoin 2025 and some of the wild trades that are happening with stable coins and how you can make yourself great again and engage in what really makes a difference. You can go back to that if you haven't watched it. We break it up into 3 parts. This is part 2, where I'm going to be going through and continuing on this week in macro. Now, to tie the Bitcoin conversation with the gold conversation, with the macro conversation, you'll notice that Bitcoin ETF inflows over the last month have overtaken gold over the last 5 weeks. So with gold, there has been outflows. With Bitcoin, there has been inflows. So it's becoming really clear that people are protecting themselves, as well as BlackRock's clients, which are the high net worth individuals and the institutions. They are protecting this transition to a multipolar world using the Bitcoin ETF. You can use Bitcoin itself. And while central banks are using gold in the longer term trend, you can see there is a de-dollarization of treasuries and dollar denominated assets as reserves, and an increase in gold over time. Central banks don't have the regulations in order to do it with Bitcoin yet. We're starting to see Czech Republic as the first central bank that's looking to protect the central bank's balance sheet with Bitcoin. And the Bank for International Settlements is releasing guidance that will come out and come into force maybe next year as well. So you get to front run all of that as well. But Bitcoin, $9 billion of inflows over the last 5 weeks, whereas gold has been a $2.8 billion of inflows. And I believe we are in, if you've watched all my previous videos, BlackRock strategy of a destabilization campaign within America, and everything is continuing as we see this. Essentially, if you've watched previous episodes, very quick summary, I said that China has already won the trade war. BlackRock has been investing in a peaceful Middle East and a BRICS multipolar world. The technology behind America becoming a technocracy and sacrificing Europe and UK to the proof of weapons network so they can extract more and asset strip more and push it towards a surveillance state with a central bank digital currency in Europe and a stable coin technocracy within America. And so I've been sharing how BlackRock wants a multipolar world order that I've been covering. And we can see that as Trump, who was installed to put tariff policies in, which is the perfect way of getting to that multipolar world order and strategically having capital outflows from America, I said the key indicators to look at is the interest on the 10 and 30-year bonds, the yield on the 10 and 30-year bonds. Now, they went slightly lower to just below 4.5% for the 10-year bond, which is the price that America needs to pay in order to refinance its debt with a 10-year bond. And with a 30-year bond, it's got to pay just under 5% at the moment. The current debt, the $37 trillion of debt that America has right now, is an average rate that they're paying of 3.3%. So even if you get the Federal Reserve to lower rates on short-term bills like 3 months bonds and 6 months bonds and long, shorter dated bonds, you're going to have to pay a higher rate anyway, no matter what you manage to get the Fed to do with interest rates. So what is Trump doing? Well, Trump's really, as we move into this $10 trillion refinancing of the US debt, they beta tested a 20-year bond, which is a weird bond. Most people either invest in short-term bills or 10 years or 30 years, but they beta tested an auction on the 20-year bond, and the demand was low, and the rates on the longer term, yield on the longer term bonds went up, and it started to, in combined with the tariff policy, take those that own the most amount of U.S. treasuries and U.S. bonds, i.e. countries like Japan, and it made them sell their bonds so that you can essentially take those treasuries, sell them for dollars, and then sell those dollars to buy local currency, Japanese won. And then that pushes up the price of those currency when traded against the dollar. So the dollar goes down relative to the won. You sell those assets, the yield on the longer term bonds, the 10-year and 30-year, go up, and you end up with capital outflow out of America, and Japan becoming, focusing on their own economy, and things starting to break because people use Japan and the Bank of Japan to get 0% interest loads, hedge out the currency risk, and invest it in the US stock market. So we're seeing part of the reversal of those trends. And so now Japan is selling bonds rather than buying bonds. And we're starting to see that the same trend in the euro, in other currencies, in China. And you're starting to see this strategic, controlled demolition of the US as the global hegemon, while Trump says he's coming off the deep state, and you have Elon there, and they take away all of the constructs that propped up the dollar, i.e. USAID through covert wars and all those types of things. You deconstruct it, and you get this resetting of the world order while Trump invests in the same places that BlackRock's investing in. So follow their money, and you're able to get indications into it. And as I covered in part one, stablecoin issuers like Trump, like World Liberty Financial with Steve Witkoff, like Tether with Cantor Fitzgerald, they benefit the higher those yields are, because then they can issue a stablecoin, and you can enter into this radical monetary reform that I've been speculating we might enter into way before Trump was elected as well. And so in reaction to that, Trump this week met with the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell. And Jerome Powell is middle management. He doesn't control the Fed. The shareholders of the Federal Reserve control the Fed, which is the banks that get to influence policy of FOMC, the Open Market Committee. And then they do what's in the best interest of the BlackRock portfolio companies and State Street and Vanguard that are all public companies with significant shareholders as well. And so he had a meeting at the White House. The net outcome was not surprise, is the narrative that he needs to feed to the MAGA people that don't watch Bitcoin Hard Talk, that thinks Trump is taking on the Fed and he's going to lower rates so he can refinance the debt at a lower rate, not knowing that it's the 10-year and the 30-year that matters, because you can't refinance the debt on the short-term bills, which is what caused this problem in the first place. And so Trump came out and he made an announcement telling Jerome Powell that the Fed is making a mistake on interest rates. Because what would happen if the Fed did lower interest rates? It would have the opposite effect. It would push up the rates of the 10-year and 30-year treasuries, which would benefit the stablecoin issuers, mean that if you want to refinance the debt, it will cost more. And so monetary policy is becoming rendered ineffective, and they're moving to fiscal policy. And rather than reform money, they're doing tax reform, which only, as I've always said, creates distortions with tariffs, but it doesn't solve the problem. You can't solve a monetary reform problem with tax reform like tariffs, which is what drew me to the conclusion where everybody was confused. Right in the beginning, I was able to say this will make massive bankruptcies within American companies. They'll be acquired by the large corporations and the BlackRock portfolio companies. It will reset the world order where the countries that rely on exports work with China to make up for the 10% that they export to America. It will strategically weaken America. There will be a global recession, which everyone will be impacted by, but it will draw everyone closer to BRICS, and the large corporations run by BlackRock that use America as a vassal state and Trump as a vassal policy to reset the portfolio. The export-driven countries will have companies that go bust, and they'll be consolidated up to the BlackRock portfolio companies. It will implement into a trade war that's not about rebuilding the manufacturing base. It's about building AI and robotics, and it won't create jobs because that's the only way this technocracy can compete with the manufacturing base in China. And it will benefit, it will be a confiscation, just like the C19 event that happened in 2000, that redistributed wealth from Main Street to BlackRock portfolio companies. So it is part of the destabilization campaign to maximize profits. We also had more as well, where the Supreme Court, they came out and said that the members of the Federal Reserve, they are prohibited against removal. And so, you know, this is kind of Trump's narrative of whether he thinks he can take on the Federal Reserve. They're on the same team. They work for the same people. There was also a new ruling that the Trump administration's basically exceeded its authority in imposing worldwide and retaliatory tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or it's called IEFPA. And so this was to create a new pump in the stock market. Everybody's like, the tariffs aren't happening. We can get back to the proof of weapons network, debt-based Ponzi scheme. We can make sure that the majority of Americans don't benefit, but at least I get to retire and my stocks and real estate continue to go up again. And then suddenly it's met with the US Appeals Court. They reinstate President Trump's tariffs. Those businesses that were like, do I get a refund? Do I trade? They go into stealth mode. Then it comes back and no one knows how to do business. And this is the predictable, guaranteed, and inevitable. And, you know, you just got to follow the money rather than listening to the narratives. Now, Trump came out and created another destabilization campaign. Last week, I said that he said 50% tariffs on Europe. And then he came out and said that he agrees to delay the 50% tariffs on Europe, not from July the 1st, which is next week, to July the 9th. Again, this is about creating wild swings in market, making America an unpredictable place to do business with, and resetting the world order to this multipolar world order. Trump essentially works for the GCC bloc and BRICS, and is doing a great job for BlackRock's portfolio companies because they partnered with them as well. We also had Elon Musk coming out and saying that he's left the Trump administration role. The reason and the catalyst for that is because, remember what I said way before Elon even joined? I said, you can't pay off the twin deficit, the fiscal deficit, and the fiscal, the trade imbalance, without weakening the dollar and no longer being the world reserve currency in the case of the trade side. And on the fiscal side, it creates a Great Depression because every dollar is debt. You can't pay down debt. That's $37 trillion of the money supply that needs to be there because it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme. So you have to have monetary reform before you can have paying down the debt. And so he thought that he was paying down the debt. It didn't work. And eventually, all that happened is the data was extracted to artificial intelligence. USAID and various organizations were shut down, which loses US soft power. Suddenly, Trump comes out and leads, I covered it last week, the big, beautiful bill. And I covered how it helps the military-industrial complex, kicks off the next phase of wealth extraction from the American people to kick off the space Cold War. You can covered all of that last week. Gets tax cuts at the top, but it was essentially a big increase in spending. And so Elon's like, well, what am I doing? Whether it's theatrics or whether he's upset, there's meant to be a meeting with Elon and Trump at the White House today. But the idea is more volatility because Elon came out and said, you can't have a big bill and a beautiful bill. You can have a big bill, you can have a beautiful bill, but you can't have both. Well, you know, if you are a monetary reformer and you've been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that this Ponzi scheme has to continue. unless you want to reset the world order and do currency reform as well, which is what we'll always be doing. But anyway, more volatility, more division, and companies deciding, do I get a refund on my tariff? Do I do not? All business uncertainty. And so small business bankruptcies will follow. And this will lead to the ones that survive having higher prices because they got to factor in the imports, because China does not need America. America needs China. And I broke that down in the episode of Bitcoin Hard Talk where I did, it's not US versus China, it's BlackRock versus the world. Anyway, now I want to cover the things that are actually happening that they're probably not covering you if you just watch, social media or Western media. There was a massive conference that had really significant implications, and it had zero coverage in the West. So you probably never even heard about it because it doesn't get any coverage. And it is a big deal. And it's not really a surprise to Bitcoin Hard Talk people. But essentially, it was China, the countries of Southeast Asia, otherwise known as ASEAN, the Southeast Asia countries, and the Arab states through the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC. So this is where I said all the power is shifting to in terms of the growth, the capital outflows from BlackRock ETFs, the repatriation of capital. And they basically held a summit in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And it just didn't get any coverage because they don't want you to know the message, because the message is just obvious in terms of the BlackRock portfolio company agenda and the multipolar world order that I've been sharing with you. But it confirms what I said, those impact would be of tariffs. Basically, those blocks could become the largest blocks working together. I've said that the reason that we had the tariff policy is because GCC and BRICS aligned. Now we've got ASEAN and the GCC and China becoming essentially an economic bloc of agreement. So what was agreed at this? Well, firstly, it was to develop completely free trade between China, the ASEAN countries, and the Gulf Cooperation Council. So there's going to be free trade amongst those. There's also going to be a de-dollarization, which doesn't mean that it basically means they trade between each other in barter networks, which was the BRICS mission. And you can do it in your local currencies rather than doing it in the dollar. So in case you get weaponized by sanctions, you can still trade. And this was the idea behind BRICS. While everyone was saying they're not going to launch a currency, it can't compete with the dollar, they were saying they don't even get in with each other. Well, they've already showed that countries that were previously sanctioned are able to trade with each other. They built alternative payment rails for CBDCs, as well as local legacy fiat currencies, as well as using public blockchains, Bitcoin, stable coins, and even Ethereum in some cases as well, to essentially de-dollarize and explore how they can do cooperation with local currencies and cross-border payments. And so this is all the things, the inevitable, predictable result. It was also a commitment by these countries to explore Belt and Road connectivity, which is where essentially BRICS, led by China, is controlling some of the ports, working and investing with countries in order to build up their manufacturing side, buy products from China. And then the African countries, as I covered in the South Africa episode, they're saying, well, we would like to use our leverage to build the final product here and employ people here. And obviously BlackRock has invested in that vision to have ultra high growth by the BRICS countries investing in the global South alongside the GCC. There was also an initiative to, between the countries, have seamless connectivity, including the development of logistics controls and digital platforms to make that seamless, using, I guess, these different types of real-world assets and different types of trade products that are being built as well. They also want to develop a regional digital economy framework, including artificial intelligence. Now, remember in part one, I covered the deals that Trump did. It was immediately followed with NVIDIA selling chips to the UAE, building data centers and controlling some of that artificial intelligence, and energy deals so that you can plug it in with nuclear energy, which is how you power all this artificial intelligence, and you can do Bitcoin mining at significantly cheaper rates so they can build their sovereign reserves and play those energy plays using nuclear markets as well. And so they're exploring how they can do energy market collaboration by plugging these networks together with 2 billion people, 30% of the world's gross domestic product, and 50% of the world's GDP growth by using purchasing power parity. PPP is an alternative to GDP. GDP. Basically, it factors in currency devaluations to try and factor that out of the equation by factoring in the cost of living. And so if you have a significantly lower cost of living, but a higher GDP, then PPP effectively corrects that. And by measuring with PPP, China is already significantly a larger economy than America when you factor this in. And so 55% of global PPP is factored into these corridors and connectivity. So this feeds into my thesis that essentially Trump, a proxy of BlackRock invested in BRICS and GCC and technocracy in US. Trump is helping China, and even I can show you an example of one deal. This is just crystal clear when you follow, and rather than doing it with crypto side, you can look at some of the macro side. There was a deal where essentially China now has seized one of the most strategic assets in Syria, which is strategically important to the GCC, one of their ports. And if you look at all these ports, it is Trump negotiating. He's saying we're getting great deals for America, but it's negotiations between BlackRock, China, and the GCC countries. That's all that they're doing. Sovereign wealth for GCC, sovereign wealth for China and BRICS, and corporate wealth for BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network, which is being weaponized against the people at the moment. This is why I want you to understand these trends so you can protect yourself. Well, anyway, one of the most strategic ports is in Syria. I mean, this has just been a human tragedy of proxies, Western proxies like ISIS and Al-Qaeda fighting Qatari, Iranian, Turkish proxies. I've covered it many times in the geopolitical side. We won't rehash it right now. But Turkey, did a regime change, and you've got new leadership, and then a series of deals that happened before and after that. But through that port, essentially, there was a 30-year deal that was signed between China and that port via a French company. So on May the 1st, there was headlines that said a French giant, which was taking over Syria's port of Latakia. The company was called CMA CGM, and it is basically French in name only, because in 2013, China basically dropped about $400 million for a 49% stake in CMA's terminals and various other ports that it invests in. And then later did another $1 billion loan through the Belt and Road Initiative asset so that it could rebuild. Now, Belt and Road is popular because it doesn't do what the IMF model of covert regime change, forever wars, overthrowing your government, installing a puppet government to privatize all the resources and then sell them to the corporations, or and BlackRock ends up managing them through ETFs. They don't change the model that your country has, so it's popular with people. But CMA CGM basically signed a 30-year deal to run, expand, and modernize the port of Latakia. there was a $320 million investment, and there's going to be a new deep water quay that's built as well. It's a 40% revenue split between the government of Syria and the corporation. Syria gets 60%, CMA gets 40%, and China essentially through CMA gets the control of the port and strategic control, which is exactly the model that the IMF did, but this time doing it without the regime changes. So essentially, this is the model that's being exerted. Now, normally you would expect US to be pushing against that if you believe the MAGA narrative. But we are seeing that US is strategically exiting these regions because, as I said, the things that I've been covering with the GCC and BRICS trade as well. So 2 weeks after this deal was done, Trump visited the Middle East. He visited Saudi. He visited Qatar. He visited UAE. I covered the Saudi Arabia talk in previous episodes. And immediately, Trump reverses his policy on Syria. So this is another example of how Trump is negotiating for BlackRock portfolio companies. The portfolio companies are working with the GCC. The GCC has now board members on BlackRock, and they get to invest in this new peaceful structure. And this is how I know, when we cover the geopolitical section, that we're not in the neocon model of forever wars. And so I can project that forward into seeing whether narratives make sense or not. But essentially, by lifting the sanctions and doing exactly what Trump did, he is helping China's investments. And then strategically exiting, allowing for the peaceful deal. Of course, Trump is doing deals on the side. And some of those financing of the deals, like the Trump Towers in Qatar, UAE, Saudi, some of them are funded by ICBC. ICBC is the largest bank in China. So follow the money, don't believe the narrative, and you can make yourself great again rather than doing the fake version and believing the politicians are going to do it for you. So immediately Trump comes out and he lifts sanctions. So that now allows for all the growth in the region. And he calls for the former Al-Qaeda leader in charge. He says that he's a handsome man and all the things that happened. And now Latakia is part of China's expanding deals with the GCC, with BRICS. And Reuters came out afterwards and reported that the new government will stop printing currency in Russia. So it's local currency. It's not going to be, it was printing as local currency in Russia. And instead it's going to be doing it in Germany and the UAE. And so you can imagine what types of deals. Maybe BlackRock has more power because it has strategically weakened Germany. So Germany is a vassal state for BlackRock, UAE a part of the GCC bloc. And you can see how these power negotiations work in the real world. And UAE is essentially becoming a place for currency experiments. It is also creating through Abu Dhabi, a crypto-friendly environment, and is going to have a tax-neutral zone. So when America launches these stable coins, BlackRock launches these tokenized assets, they can go globally, and these regions can invest in AI, they can use energy, they can use it to power proof-of-stake networks, which can host stable coins, and then they can use it to also mine some Bitcoin as well. So you can see how everything is transitioning to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. And all you need to do is follow the money as well. Dubai Ports, which is a company, they signed an $800 million investment deal in Tartus port in Syria as well. So essentially Russia, China, UAE, alongside the GCC, they go effective and strategic control. It's better to be controlled by your neighbors. And this is all part of the US exit, which is why tariff policies happened in the first place, which is why Trump was installed as well. These were why in previous videos, when I covered like the India-Pakistan war, I was able to say, follow the money, you can see what this is happening. And I were following some of the deals that are being done in outposts within Pakistan, within Sri Lanka, and the fact that China's got like these 90-year leases as well. So anyway, that's how you can understand when you follow the money, you get a different picture. And why I want you to make yourself great again. I want you to always follow the money and make sure you like and subscribe, because BlackRock is turning US into a regional technocracy. And it is doing deals with its own portfolio company, and the Trump administration and Trump is essentially negotiating all those deals for them. And by ending sanctions, this just helps push that through. That's why I believe that we're going to actually see an Iran nuclear deal as well, because it was China that negotiated a normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and this is just the execution. So if you're watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, you're ahead of this, and that's why my theory is that the Trump tariffs are not a trade war. It was an execution of BlackRock's strategy via Trump, simply because the trade war was already won, and there were all those proxy wars that we've been talking about as well. And this brings us into why I believe that the ceasefire that was just announced by the Trump administration, that was negotiated directly between Hamas and America, I think this is the real deal that I have been sharing, even though for 100 years it's all been fugazi negotiations in order to justify how they can steal trillions of dollars of profits from the American people over to the military industrial complex, create inflation so you can spend the bill, and quite frankly, commit crimes against humanity through these endless forever wars, which are never meant to end. They're just meant to make a lot of money for those that profit from it. So if you enjoyed This Week in Macro, we have part 3. The final part is This Week in Geopolitics. And this week in geopolitics, I'm going to be covering, by following the money, why I think what will come next in the game theory between the announcement of the ceasefire and the ongoing Iran nuclear deal that is being negotiated. So do me a favor, if you're enjoying this, please like, share, subscribe. If you're watching the broken up version, then you can watch part 3, where I'll be going over This Week in Geopolitics. I'm going to take a little bit of water. Please, if you're not a subscriber, subscribe to the channel. If you're not a free member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, go over to simondixon.com, register yourself. If you're not following me on Rumble, in case YouTube gets shut down, please do that. If you want real-time updates, follow me on X. And if you would like to download this and watch it in leisure when you're working out or driving with no extra time, then go to Apple Podcast, download Bitcoin Hard Talk, and do the same on Spotify if you're an Android user or you prefer that. And then we're going to go through the final section of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 83. This week in Bitcoin, the Gaza ceasefire and the Iran nuclear deal and the game theory behind it.